In today's video, we discuss every problem with the lore of Yandere Simulator, as well as how fans would fix them. Trust me, there are a lot of problems with the game's lore. With that being said, let's get started. One of the more common complaints about the lore of Yandere Simulator has to do with the Aishi curse. In general, fans of Yandere Simulator have criticized the Aishi curse as being exaggerated and unnecessary to the game's overall story. For example, Reddit user Machias08 stated, "I actually like it when games have extensive lore past the surface level, but Yandere Simulator's lore is an example of how not to do it. For one example, the Aishi family suffering a generational curse. It really just doesn't make any sense to me, and it's not helped by the fact that there is zero explanation for this curse even existing in the first place. Did it just happen out of nowhere? Did one of Ayano's ancestors perform a ritual that went wrong, and that's how the bloodline got cursed? When you actually think about it, there are a couple of plot holes relating to the Aishi curse. As Machias08 said, it's never explained where the Aishi curse even came from. We do know when the first Aishi got the curse, but it hasn't been explained how she got it. Another criticism of the Aishi curse is how it adds, quote, unnecessary lore to Ayano's character. To this end, Reddit user FR Street wrote, "The supernatural stuff, even down to the Aishi family curse. Too much explanation for a basic concept idea. Just let her be a yandere and let the world breathe a little without stuffing it full of random lore no one asked for." One could argue that Ayano does not need the Aishi curse existing to explain why she is the way she is. After all, the basic premise of Yandere Simulator is a schoolgirl killing people to get with the person she desires. Lore is not really needed to make this idea work. Users have proposed solutions to this problem, however. Reddit user Chilling Somber wrote, "I think the Aishi curse could work. Instead of actually making it an actual curse, just turn it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Due to the curse being so ingrained in the Aishi bloodline, they fooled themselves into following their supposed fate. Sure, this isn't going to fix the story, but it'll at least give a plausible explanation." This is a good point. If you want the concept of the Aishi curse to work, one could change it from being a curse into a, quote, self-fulfilling prophecy. This will give the characters a reason to always do the same thing generation after generation, as they have convinced themselves to do this out of necessity. Another very controversial part of Yandere Simulator's lore concerns one of the rivals, specifically Mita Rana. She is the 7th of the 10 rivals in the game, meaning she appears during the 7th week of school. Anyway, Mita has proven to be the most controversial rival of Yandere Simulator. Many videos and posts discuss why she is horrible and should not be in the game. Explanation of Mita's predatory behavior. In her character sheet, it states that her hobby is seducing schoolboys, and that once she goes to Academia High School, she will quickly begin hunting for new prey and senpai will catch her attention. The glorification of Mita's predatory behavior. Mita Rana's revealing character design, sensual dialogue, and overall presentation are portrayed as sexy and attractive in Yandere Simulator, but it's very disturbing to do this to an adult who hits on teenage boys. Mita Rana's lack of personality. Mita Rana's bio, unlike Osana's, does not give out any useful information that explains her behavior. The only thing you can find is the repetitive amount of times it is stated that Mita Rana likes teenage boys, making her bio just a dry dessert of pedophilia. It becomes evident as to why everyone hates the concept of Mita Rana. Her character is borderline predatory and extremely inappropriate for a game like Yandere Simulator, let alone most games in general. It becomes even worse when you remember that all of the students at Academia are barely 18, with some likely being underage. That puts into perspective how bad Mita Rana's character is. Due to how creepy Mita's character is, fans have created their own rewrites to make her not as bad of a character. Some of them involve giving her a new personality and backstory, while others have made it so her true intentions are more obvious. I would make it more obvious that she is grooming such manipulating senpai and not a love interest. The concept of her being a predator is one that I like, since it's not something done often, and with the right mindset can be done amazingly, as long as she is considered that. Knowing Pedo Dev, she will always be just a love interest, which shows more about him than anyone else. Make her a student that tutors instead of being a pervert. Make her not an actual threat but still have Ayano think she is. Like maybe Mita has to tutor Taro and they form a kind of mother-son type relationship, but Ayano sees it as Mita trying to manipulate him. Paint her as a villain. Our main goal is to eliminate her. Maybe we also have to protect Samson from the evil teacher. Who the hell is Samson? All in all, Mita Rana is definitely one of the most problematic characters within Yandere Simulator. Most fans dislike her as a whole, with her backstory and personality being a clear example of why. Another complaint about Yandere Simulator's lore has to do with Ryoba's trial. For those who don't know, Ryoba's trial was the in-game event that determined whether or not she got away with murdering the 10 rivals in 1980s mode. Even though not too many people have criticized this part of the game, a few people have shared quite a lot of information regarding their dislike of the trial. Reddit user Qtum summarized their thoughts saying, quote, "One thing that I can talk about forever was the complete unprofessionalness of the 1980s mode trial, and that the only reason Ryoba won the trial was because Ayano would have never existed if she didn't. Basically just plot armor to keep it steady. You could definitely argue that Ryoba's trial was only created to allow Ayano to come into the story at a later point. However, Ryoba winning the trial does not always play out in game. Depending on what the player does, she could be found guilty and the game ends there. Regardless, the official storyline of Ryoba being found innocent still stands. Believe it or not, Qtum has written in more depth about why they find Ryoba's trial to be flawed. In September 2024, they wrote a very long comment explaining their criticisms of Ryoba's trial in 1980s mode. However, since I'm too lazy to read all of it, we'll briefly summarize their comment. In summary, some of Qtum's issues with the trial included a lack of structure, Ryoba's behavior being suspicious, certain types of evidence being dismissed, statements being addressed inappropriately, and bias being present. Should I make a video talking about Ryoba's trial? Let me know in the comments below. Another notable complaint about the lore of Yandere Simulator is how it's all over the place. This was one of the more common criticisms on Reddit, meaning that fans clearly have an issue with it. User OKStruggle5695 has written about this, stating, quote, "My problem is that the story is literally everywhere and it gets more tangled. The whole story of the Aishin Psycho families, Succubus sisters, now Ayano's grandmother and Ryoba's mother. Everything is literally stacked one after another, and not in a good way. When you think about it, the lore of Yandere Simulator does have a lot of parts that are not connected whatsoever. In addition to this, fans have also stated that parts of the lore are not fully utilized. Reddit user Sweet Tooth T shared examples of this, saying, quote, "The lack of use of everything in the game. Like, you have a money system that only works for a dude in the alley rather than the overall game. You have supernatural or epic lore that doesn't show or be explored in the game, and when it does, it gets glossed over. An obvious way to fix this issue is to organize the lore so everything is not cluttered. Whether this leads to lore being removed or reworked entirely, organizing the game's lore so that it's not all over the place will make things a lot better." Another controversial part of Yandere Simulator's lore is the backstory of Witness-chan. In case you don't know, Yui Tsunesu, also known as Witness-chan, is one of the characters found in 1980s mode. She first appeared in the game as a character named Witness-chan, but was removed for a while before reappearing as a maid, then re-added into 1980s mode. Anyway, she had a backstory that proved very controversial among fans of Yandere Simulator. What was this backstory? Prepare your ears. Near the end of the Cold War, aka 1989, some incidents happened in Witness-chan's classroom, where random girls would find some white liquid on their belongings. You probably know what kind of white liquid this is. Witness-chan realized that some male student was doing this gross behavior. She was friends with a boy who confessed to the class that he was behind those incidents. This led to him being bullied for the remainder of the school year. Sometime after graduating high school, Witness-chan found out that the boy was being blackmailed into committing these acts. Why? The girl hated some of her classmates and forced the boy to jizz all over their items. He ended up confessing to free himself from the blackmail. Needless to say, Witness-chan felt guilty for this. She believed she would have figured everything out if she had paid more attention to her surroundings. This incident is the reason why Witness-chan is nosy as fuck. After reading all of this, it becomes very obvious why this backstory was extremely controversial among fans of Yandere Simulator. No, because that shit was so unnecessary. Why is the first idea he thinks of when asked why is Yui so paranoid have to do with jizz? My honest reaction to reading that. Please excuse me while I gouge out my eyeballs. Doki Doki Literature Club character using raid. Yeah, I don't really know what to say for that one. The story doesn't end there though. It was revealed that this plotline was stolen from a manga titled Onani Master Kurosawa, I think. Surprisingly, this is not a hentai manga. So, on top of being very disgusting, Witness-chan's backstory wasn't even original. Thankfully, this is no longer Witness-chan's backstory. She got a new one later. Still, Witness-chan's original backstory proved to be very controversial among fans of Yandere Simulator. This criticism was one that I actually found pretty interesting. Reddit user Sky the Weird Idiot replied to our post commenting, quote, "I feel like Yandere devs should either give lore to every character or none at all and focus on the schoolgirl murdering to get her crush aspect of the game. I see a lot of people saying that there's so much unneeded lore in the game, but to be fair, it is his game and he can do what he wants with it. But my main issue is how some characters are way more developed than others. If there's going to be character lore, then develop lore for everyone, not just random characters." What Sky is essentially saying is that the amount of lore between the characters is imbalanced. They use Megami as an example, writing, quote, "Megami is very obviously way more developed story-wise than the rest of the rivals, so much so that she's been deemed a Mary Sue by the fandom." This connects back to the section dedicated to her, where fans have deemed Megami a Mary Sue. Sky did propose a solution to this issue, which is to give lore to all of the in-game characters. I actually agree with this, as it would cause the world of Yandere Simulator to have more personality. It would also lead to none of the characters standing out as much as Megami currently does. They wrote, "If all of the rivals had some extremely developed lore like Megami, and Megami's lore and planned gameplay style was toned down a bit, I feel like she wouldn't be called a Mary Sue anymore." If Sky's solution to this problem was implemented, it would likely lead to fans no longer calling Megami a Mary Sue. Believe it or not, Academy has received criticism from fans. One criticism that's popped up is how all of the students are the same age. This makes sense considering how in high school, everyone's age is somewhat varied. For example, freshmen are either 14 or 15, sophomores are either 15 or 16, juniors are either 16 or 17, and seniors are either 17 or 18. However, this is not the case in Yandere Simulator, where everyone is, quote, the same age. User Scarlet_Sky has written about this, stating, quote, "The whole cosplay university, everyone is exactly 18 nonsense. He should either make it a high school and have them all be 15 to 18, or make it a college and have them be 18 to 21. But having everyone in the school be exactly 18 makes no sense. Especially when you consider that some students are outright stated to have been there for multiple years, which means that these students are all the exact same age even though they're in different grade levels. And it gets even stupider when Hanako shows up and she's the exact same age as her supposedly older brother. Considering the fact that everyone is the same age, this makes it difficult to determine whether Academy is a high school or a college. I said it's because the ages of a high school senior and a college freshman are both 18. Therefore, Academy would have to be specifically stated to either be a college or a high school to avoid confusion. Speaking of everyone, Morphig5840 wrote, "If all students are 18 or older, then why are they going back to high school when they could be working or going to a university? What is the reason?" That's a very fair point. I have nothing more to say on that. Another part of the Yandere Simulator lore fans have criticized is the Psycho family. For some, the very idea of the Psycho family is enough to dislike them. Some have even said that they straight up don't like the family at all. An example of this comes from the Reddit user Sakai Krill, who wrote, "I just don't like anything about it at this point. Sure, the lore is interesting, but the characters really aren't. It feels like Alex just wrote random things into the backstory and the lore of this family to make it cool, mysterious, and edgy. But it feels more like some plot that a 6th grader wrote for their imaginary Undertale alternate universe or something." The idea of the Psycho family being unnecessary to the plot of Yandere Simulator is a common one. Lina Yan is another user who believes this, writing, quote, "Everything in the lore is about them and it's extremely irritating." It's clear that a lot of people are not a fan of the Psycho family as a whole. It has been suggested that the Psycho family would be better suited to having a game about them only, which is honestly fair. Considering how much lore is known about the Psycho family, a game dedicated to just them would make a lot of sense. One complaint that fans have had about the lore of Yandere Simulator has to do with InfoChan. For those who don't know, Info-chan is one of the characters in Yandere Simulator. Her main purpose is to provide the player with various services that can help aid them. Anyway, Info-chan has been a subject of criticism over the years. Reddit user FarmMammoth3214 wrote, "Why does this random girl want to help Ayano? Why does she get this room all to herself? Why does the faculty allow this? Why does she have access to random items like drugs or various poisons? Where are her parents? Are they alive? In mission mode, how does she recognize Nemesis?" It does make sense that fans would question the role of Info-chan. After all, the question of how she got to her position has not been answered in great detail. Reddit user Morfig5840 summed up their criticisms of Info-chan as the following. Have a room just for her, gets information about everybody and decides to help Ayano makes no sense. Not to mention her being allowed in school when I don't even know the basics like her real name. The latter part has somewhat been explained, as Info-chan supposedly blackmailed the headmaster of academia to allow her to be there. Whether or not this is a good explanation is up for debate. If Info-chan had a bit more of a backstory and had her mechanics changed, I could see her becoming much more popular within the Yandere Simulator community. I know the title of this section sounds weird, but it'll make sense. Reddit user Apathetic Robbins wrote the following comment in the replies to our post. The reason that the suitors can always find a rival they have a crush on, even when she's dead, is because they all wear a very strong perfume that they can track down. Like dogs, I guess. It gives a funny mental image, but it makes absolutely no sense. I actually did not know this was a thing. That being said, I could not find a mention of this piece of trivia on the Yandere Simulator wiki. Therefore, take it with a grain of salt. I do agree that it's stupid though. Apathetic Robbins also wrote the following about this piece of trivia. Why can't Raibaru sniff out Osana but Kyuji can? In Japan, it's considered rude to use too much fragrance. Well, tough luck to computer science majors. So this doesn't really make sense. Why is there not a gameplay option to steal the rival's perfume so the suitor cannot track her? And last but not least, no perfume is strong enough for someone to be able to sniff out the person using it from across the school campus. If this is indeed the case, then it's definitely one of the dumber pieces of trivia about Yandere Simulator. Again, I could not find this being officially mentioned anywhere, so take that piece of trivia with a grain of salt. Speaking of the Psycho family, another complaint regarding the Yandere Simulator lore has to do with Megami Psycho, the supposed 10th rival. A majority of complaints regarding Megami are about her being, quote, too perfect and flawless. This is very understandable, as this both makes her unlikable and unrealistic. In a post dedicated to Megami's flaws, user FormerLaugh269 writes, "She just feels insanely overpowered compared to everyone else. Now of course we only have 2 of the 2020X rivals, but she already seems leagues above Osana with her bodyguard, and Amai mostly surrounded by the cooking club. And then Megami is just this unkillable invincible goddess, which yes fits her stupid translated name, but makes her seem extremely unfun. Everything mentioned previously has also led to Megami being seen as an impossible final boss." Reddit user Floresita Sonic has spoken about this, stating, quote, "Megami should just be replaced in general. She sounds like a pain in the ass rather than a fun and challenging final boss." The amount of lore known about her adds to this, but we'll discuss that later. If changes were made to Megami's character, I feel like fans would receive her a lot better. Yeah, the title of this section was a joke. However, this will make sense in a bit. Reddit user @1weirdo Julia replied to our post saying, quote, "I was asking questions, and Yandere dev stated that the Aishis start in the 1800s, and the oldest living Aishi is 133, but that means their senpai is still alive. Because I asked what happens if the senpai dies, and he said they commit suicide. I can't lie, I wasn't sure if this was actually the case. After all, the oldest living human ever, Jean Calment, lived to be 122 years old. However, I found comments on the Yandere Simulator wiki that confirmed this to have been the case at one point. There is also an old Google Doc that states, Yandere-chan's great-great-great-grandmother is still alive. So, at one point, Ayano's third great-grandmother was indeed still alive. It makes sense why one would find this piece of trivia really annoying, as it's not realistic. However, this has been retconned and Ayano's third great-grandmother is now dead. One notable complaint about the lore of Yandere Simulator is how it is poorly executed. In the comments of a different post I made, user such a creative name 12 wrote, "I would also say this. The way the lore is delivered is also unenjoyable. It's supposed to be Ayano's story, yet she lacks agency in her own narrative. She's being tugged along by InfoChan and being told what to do, instead of utilizing Ayano's pre-existing knowledge. Yet Ayano is unnecessarily reliant on InfoChan to do things for her? Why does she need to be told to stalk Osana like a pet by InfoChan? Ayano stalks Taro. She on her own intuition should investigate and determine for herself whether or not the girls are a threat. To be honest, I did not think of Ayano's character this way. She could definitely be doing everything in-game herself, yet she relies on someone like InfoChan to get certain items and do certain tasks for her. Such a creative name 12 further wrote, "Instead we have this omnipotent character, InfoChan, that just somehow knows everything and just dumps lore and character information. Alex releases all these lore bits, but they don't actually make the story more intriguing or any more engageful. The way it's delivered is boring, spoon-fed or obscure, and Ayano the character rarely ever has thoughts or speculations of her own. With the existence of InfoChan, it takes away some of the player's ability to discover the game's lore completely on their own. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing is up for debate. Some have also argued that the addition of InfoChan makes them question whether Yandere Dev even cares about Ayano at all. To this end, such a creative name 12 wrote, "As I'm typing this, I'm even questioning if Alex even really cares about Ayano that much. Ryoba has a far more interesting story. If anything, the lore bits add to make her more menacing and her more engaging as a character in 1980s mode. People like Ryoba, InfoChan, the entire Psycho family, and even Mission Mode Nemesis get more development and relevance than Ayano when it's just supposed to be a story about a yandere high school girl with a crush. Like, what is even going on? The fact that other characters such as Ryoba, InfoChan, and the Psycho family have more lore than Ayano is pretty telling of the game's priorities." Once again, we return to the Psycho family. For those who don't know, the Psycho family is one of two prominent families in Yandere Simulator. They are notably the owners of Academy and Psycho Corp. Anyway, why is the Psycho family featured in this video? There is a lot of lore about them that fans of Yandere Simulator hate. For example, fans do not like the idea of the Psycho family supporting eugenics. In case you don't know, eugenics is, quote, "the selection of desired heritable characteristics in order to improve future generations, typically in reference to humans. It's basically the practice of making desirable traits appear within the human population." YouTuber Disturbing History made a really good video explaining the subject, so make sure to go watch that for more context. Anyway, in Yandere Simulator's lore, the founder of Psycho Corp, Saisho Psycho, was a supporter of eugenics. However, he never actually shared this publicly so as to not ruin his reputation. Fans of Yandere Simulator have brought up this piece of lore time and time again when discussing the worst parts of the game's lore. Am I the only one who doesn't like all the eugenic stuff in the Psycho's lore? I'm sure most of us don't like it. It's so unnecessary in a game about a yandere anime girl trying to win over her love interest. It was interesting, but for me, it was just another, ugh, here comes the quirky Psycho lore again. That eugenic stuff seems befitting for an anime-inspired setting though, so I'm not very icky with it. I don't like the Psycho lore in general, just make the game functional. Considering the extremely controversial history of eugenics, it's very understandable as to why fans have taken issue with this piece of Yandere Simulator lore. One other issue we'll discuss regarding the Psycho family involves Megami's backstory. What is this backstory? Megami's father made her kill her pet hamster at 7 years old to prove her loyalty to the family. This tradition was started by Saisho, who did it to Megami's father, who then did it to Megami. Despite resisting, Megami eventually killed her hamster, signing it as a, quote, rite of passage. You can see why many fans of Yandere Simulator do not like this piece of lore. Would work if Yandere Dev wasn't so fixated in animal deaths as a way to do cheap traumatic situations. Why does Yandev have to kill an animal to make a character deep? Cause he doesn't know how to write an actual story. I want to feel bad about it, but the only thing that comes to my mind is how Megami is Walmart's Wednesday. Cringe, animal abuse isn't a plot point and it's very overused in this gross ass game. Should I make a separate video about why fans don't like the Psycho family? Let me know in the comments below. One more controversial part of Yandere Simulator's lore has to do with the male students at Academy. Supposedly, all of the male students at Academy buy panty shots from InfoChan. Yeah, that's the piece of lore. According to the game's lore, every male student at Academy participates in this kind of behavior. This piece of lore makes no sense, considering how not every male student is the type of person to do that. Fans have shared their complaints about this piece of Yandere Simulator lore. In fact, when asked about the most fucked up lore within Yandere Simulator, this was the top complaint. Everything, to be honest, especially the one about all boys supposedly being perverts purchasing panty shots from InfoChan. It doesn't even make sense for some of the boys to be doing that because some don't care or don't like it, or some don't believe InfoChan is real. It literally makes no sense at all. He's really trying to tell me that Budo of all people buys panty shots? The martial arts club leader who likes to set a good example? Nah. This has gotta be his way of deterring people from shipping Ayana with non-senpai boys. The mechanic of panty shots is controversial in its own right, but involving the male students of Academy just brings this piece of lore to a whole new level of problematic. Like we said earlier, not every male character has the personality to do something like this. I know, right? Other students like Kazu, Otohiko, and Geiju definitely seem like they would never. So I wouldn't even buy it for a second, especially considering how unrealistic it would be for all boys to be perverts. Same for Ryoto and the leader of the photography club. Just seems completely out of character for them. Or Tsukibi Dooby-Doo. I forgot about that stupid ass name. It makes sense why fans would have a massive problem with this piece of lore. It just doesn't make sense when one thinks about it. How would you change this piece of Yandere Simulator lore? Let us know in the comments below. The final complaint we'll be sharing in this video has to do with the lore seemingly being made up randomly. What do I mean by this? Essentially, fans have claimed that Yandere Dev creates lore without considering how it'll fit into the world of Yandere Simulator. Reddit user Baba Baba Ye wrote about this, stating, quote, "It's so much but so little at the same time. It just feels like Yandere Dev gets an idea and writes it into the lore without even considering how it's going to connect to the rest of the story he made, or how he's even going to put it in the game in the first place." What they're saying is that whenever Yandere Dev comes up with an idea for lore, he just adds it without questioning if it'll make sense within the game's story. Considering everything we've talked about regarding the lore in this video, you could see why this criticism was brought up. In addition, Baba O'Reilly stated, whenever he even asks himself questions about it in videos, he'll just get all smug and go all, "You'll just have to wait and see," emoji. Bro, it's been 10 years, just tell us. Also, the fact that he contradicts himself too. He definitely does not have a clear timeline written down and is just placing things down wherever he thinks fits. Baba also states that Yandere Simulator does not have an objective timeline, which is likely a result of some of the game's lore being made up on the spot. It would definitely help if a clear timeline for Yandere Simulator was established, as it will make it easier for fans to keep track of the game's story. What do you think though? Let me know in the comments below.